Hello, participants of TK Forum 2023. My name is Melissa, and I'm part of the team that oversees the operations at Library at Chinatown. And I'm here today with my colleague Lynette, who leads the volunteer management team in NLB. We are both from the National Library Board Singapore, otherwise known as NLB, and we'll be sharing our presentation on growing NLB's volunteer community at Library at Chinatown and beyond. First off, let me give you some background on our organization. NLB is unique as we have three functions under our umbrella. First, we have public libraries, which deliver reading programs, initiatives, and exhibitions for the community. We also have the National Library, which focuses on preserving Singapore's print and literary heritage and intellectual memory, and the National Archives, which is responsible for collection, preservation, and management of Singapore's public and private archival records. Let me zoom into the public libraries. We have 29 public libraries, which include regional libraries, standalone, and mall libraries. Of these, 3 are niche libraries with thematic collections. For instance, Library at Esplanade focuses on performing arts, Library at Orchard focuses on lifestyle and design, and Library at Chinatown focuses on Chinese arts and culture. Now, I'd like to give you an introduction of Library at Chinatown. It was officially opened on 31st January 2013 and has a collection size of about 48,000 materials. This niche library was set up to help members of the public learn about Chinese arts and culture. The collection was co-developed with recommendations from an advisory panel comprising leading members of Singapore's Chinese education, arts, media, and business communities. Library at Chinatown is also a library of many firsts. It was the first to be co-developed with the community, first to be run by volunteers, and it was also the first time a commercial organization had initiated and funded a public library project. A charitable organization sponsored our operating costs and collection refresh, whilst the mall owner sponsored the rental and development cost, which includes design, construction, equipment, and startup collection. However, this unique model of co-funding with commercial and community partners did not cover manpower costs. So this presented an opportunity for NLB to test bid a volunteer-run model. NLB already had system-wide enablers in place that put us in a good position to embark on this experiment. Ongoing implementation of self-help services meant most users were accustomed to using the library independently and did not expect to be served by staff. So here are some examples of our system-wide enablers. We have the NLB mobile app, which gives patrons the option of skipping the queue and borrowing library materials through the app by scanning the QR code on the items. We also had book borrowing stations in which patrons can place their library items on the pad for auto-detection and seamless borrowing. We've got catalog stations, which patrons can search for library materials. We have e-newspaper stations where patrons can read digital newspapers for free on dedicated terminals in the library. We also have an auto sorter where library materials, when returned via the book drop, are sorted by category into specific bins, which make it easier for volunteers and staff to shelve the books. And finally, we have the reservation locker, where patrons can opt to reserve library items and select their preferred library location for easy pickup. NLB had been engaging with volunteers since 2010 and had earlier developed a volunteer management portal. So members of public could use the portal to sign up as a volunteer, search and sign up for volunteering opportunities, keep track of their volunteering contributions, and communicate with staff. With some adjustments, we were able to tap on this system to manage the volunteers at this new library. Now, volunteers who are interested in supporting the library at Chinatown can simply filter by library location and select their preferred volunteering dates and times. You can also scan the QR code at the right side of the screen for a link to visit our volunteer management portal. Volunteer management, as we all know, is not an easy task, but our takeaways from Library at Chinatown have shown us that to make it work, we need to have targeted recruitment. It's important to identify prospective volunteer pools, such as library patrons who have an interest in Chinese arts and culture, So some of the volunteers we sourced came from Chinese language book clubs, organizations and interest groups based in Chinatown, alumni and retired staff of Chinese schools. It's also vital to invest in volunteer engagements and relationships. There has to be on-site support for the volunteers to stabilize and build up volunteer community and to give them a sense of being welcomed and appreciated. At Library at Chinatown, we also provision them with lockers, refreshments, and a communal area for the volunteers to mingle and rest. Lastly, we realized that there is no one-size-fits-all model. Volunteering roles need to be designed based on what volunteers are able and willing to do. In Library at Chinatown, this meant adjusting the volunteering roster to give volunteers more flexibility in their timing. We also learned that to sustain a volunteer community, it is important to ensure that volunteers feel like they have an equal stake in the library. At Library at Chinatown, we have banners and signage announcing proudly that this is a volunteer-run library. The volunteers also have attire to give them a sense of identity, to encourage ownership and recognition. As the volunteers at Library at Chinatown do shelving and shelf reading, we also have volunteer-owned shelves, as you can see in the photo in the middle next to the man dressed in the blue shirt. The shelf ends, we have posters with the shelf details as well as the volunteer's photo and name. Again, it's not work, it's a community. So we thank and show appreciation to our volunteers by organizing events such as the Mid-Autumn Festival celebrations or volunteer appreciation events for the Library at Chinatown volunteers. So these events usually include entertainment, food, and door gifts. We just celebrated the Library at Chinatown's 10th anniversary on 17th of February in a big-scale event with the presence of our Minister for Communications and Information, Mrs. Josephine Teo. The event was an opportunity for us to acknowledge our donors and partners, but to also show appreciation for all the contributions by our volunteers over the years, without whom Library at Chinatown would not be possible. On 31st January, we also hosted a Chinese New Year celebration event to reunite our pioneer and current volunteers. These are some of the photos from the event. Although we are grateful for our volunteers, we are mindful that uncertainties such as COVID could impact them. Unfortunately, during COVID, many of our pioneer volunteers at the Library at Chinatown stopped volunteering, but we are fortunate that a fresh crop of new volunteers have taken this on, and many of them volunteer several times a week. With that, I'll hand over my time to my colleague Lynette, who will take you through the second half of the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lynette from the Volunteer Management team. As Melissa has mentioned, COVID was a challenging time for us and our volunteers, as it must have been for many of you. I would like to share a little more on how COVID impacted our volunteers and our volunteer management practices. First, we needed to adapt our volunteering roles to meet the requirements of the government's safe management measures. To ensure the safety of our volunteers, several measures were taken, such as reducing the number of volunteers on site and also disallowing walk-ins to ensure that we had full records of all volunteers in our space at any given time. Communication also became more important, as staff needed to proactively update and remind volunteers of measures such as mask wearing. Staff also made it a point to call volunteers and express care and concern and check on their well-being. On the bright side, COVID also spurred us to think of new volunteering opportunities. As on-site services were reduced, NLB needed to find ways of continuing to provide library services to our patrons and users online. As a result, we were able to create new digital opportunities for volunteers to contribute to from the safety of their homes. One example of this is the Digital Storytime Initiative, where we engaged the help of volunteers to record themselves telling stories from children's picture books. Videos were then made available online for the public. Publishers had also generously allowed us to read their books online for the enjoyment of many at no cost. You can scan the QR code on the screen to see the videos featuring our volunteers. After more than 2 years of COVID measures, most public activities were finally able to resume earlier this year. This was a chance for us to re-engage our volunteers and rebuild our volunteer community. We did so in a few ways. Firstly, by holding a volunteer appreciation event to celebrate our volunteers and express appreciation for their continued support throughout the COVID period. This was accompanied by an appreciation video released in conjunction with Volunteer Appreciation Day on the 5th of December. In addition to showing our appreciation, the video was also a way of raising awareness that volunteering had resumed in libraries. Again, you can scan the QR code on the screen to view the video. Lastly, we also organized a series of volunteer-supported community events to welcome both patrons and volunteers back to our libraries. For instance, more than 300 volunteers came forward to support a community giveaway of used library books. Today, we are grateful to have been able to re-establish relationships with many of our existing volunteers, while also reaching new individuals. We are optimistic that we are slowly but surely rebuilding our volunteer community. Last year in 2022, around 4,000 volunteers stepped up to support the delivery of library programs and services. We are heartened that more than 30% of these volunteers did so regularly and contributed 4 times a year or more. We have also built on the volunteer-run model that we trialed at Library at Chinatown to set up more of such spaces. NLB now has 6 volunteer-run spaces across our network of public libraries. The experiment at Library at Chinatown yielded 2 insights about volunteer-run spaces. The first was that there was great interest in the community to be more deeply involved in supporting the library through regular volunteering roles. The second insight is that we could do much more to improve the experience of our volunteers on the ground. To this end, we tried to make various improvements in the way we designed and operated our volunteer-run spaces. For instance, we continued to clearly demarcate volunteer-run zones with signage such as the example that you can see in the photo, which is taken from the library at Harbourfront. This encourages the public to be patient, tolerant, and more aware of our volunteers in the library. Thoughtfully designed spaces with a clear and intuitive layout helps users as well as volunteers navigate our collection more easily. Lastly, it was important for us to foster a sense of belonging among our volunteers. As Melissa has said, it's not work, it's a community. Thus, where space permits, we designate communal areas where volunteers can meet one another or simply just take a rest in between their duties. Having said that, our volunteers in the library contribute in many, many ways beyond just volunteer-run spaces, and I will share more in the following slides. In NLB, our volunteers play an important role in making our libraries welcoming and inclusive for all users. Volunteers who are library guides or user guides provide user education and support for patrons who need help using our library services. Some also conduct guided tours to introduce library features and services to new visitors. These volunteers are crucial to improving the user experience, especially during peak hours when staff may need to serve many patrons at the same time. With the help of volunteers, we have been able to reduce users' waiting times, offer more personalized assistance, and overall have more friendly faces in the library whom anyone can approach for help. We also have more specialized volunteer roles around specific interest areas. Children and children's literacy are topics that are dear to the hearts of many of our users. This is why volunteer storytelling is one of NLB's most enduring and most popular volunteer programs. Today, library branches all across the island hold children's storytelling sessions which are free for all children to attend. These sessions are made possible by a pool of more than 90 trained volunteer storytellers. Almost anyone can sign up to be a volunteer storyteller, and no experience is needed, as we work with both staff as well as more experienced volunteers to provide training and to share tips with new storytellers. We also organize networking sessions where seasoned and new volunteers can mingle with one another. We now have an energetic and diverse pool of storytellers, with the oldest volunteer being a 77-year-old retiree, while the youngest is just 10 years old, who volunteers together with her parents. Last program I'll talk about today is Kids Read. Kids Read is NLB's nationwide reading program for children aged 4 to 8 years who come from less privileged family backgrounds. We work with schools and social sector organizations to start Kids Read clubs, which comprise groups of children in different locations. Each club is led by a team of volunteers who engage the children in weekly 1-hour sessions over a period of 6 months. Each session includes storytelling and other reading-related activities which are facilitated by our volunteers. With the support of a pool of more than 1,000 volunteers, we have been able to reach more than 3,200 underprivileged children last year alone. This program is a great example of how the library can work hand in hand with volunteers to make reading and learning accessible to all segments of society, especially the less privileged. I'll end my presentation by introducing all of you to some of our volunteers to give you guys a flavor of the diversity of our volunteer pool and the many ways in which they contribute to our libraries. Firstly, Abby, the storyteller you see in the first photo, is a passionate storyteller and has been since 2016. As a certified educator, she has also volunteered as a coach for new volunteer storytellers since 2018. In the second photo, Agnes, the lady in grey, is one of our most regular and most dedicated volunteers. Last year alone, she volunteered for 477 hours, which translates to 9 hours of volunteering per week. Some of our volunteers also do so together as a family, with one example being the third photo, which is Geetha and her daughter Ovia, who are both library guides in the same library. From our volunteer-run spaces, we have the example of Saman, who, in addition to book sorting and shelving, also contributes her talent in painting to create beautiful library displays, like the one you see on screen. Lastly, we have some very special volunteers who give back by sharing their knowledge and skills with library users. In the middle photo, Kozue is an artist who facilitates a monthly interest group on zine making, while Mr. Ong is an urban farming enthusiast who runs a popular workshop series on this topic. And this brings us to the end of our presentation. We hope this has inspired you, or at least given you some ideas on how you and your organization can work with volunteers for mutually beneficial outcomes. From both Melissa and I, thank you very much for your time. Hi everyone. So we've really enjoyed working with volunteers, and we hope you do as well. You can check out the very many resources that we've shared in our slides if you need some help to get started.
Thank you so much for having us and giving us this opportunity to present at the TK Forum. And we wish you all an enjoyable session and enjoy the rest of the presentations. Thank you.